All right, we're live. What is going on, everybody?
Welcome, Jan. It's great to see you. How's the snow in Canton, Ohio? Hopefully, it's not too much here.
It's happy to wake up and see, because for those of you that don't know where I'm kind of located, I'm right smack dab in the center of downtown Canton. And outside of my one window is a direct view of the new Centennial. Seeing it covered in snow, beautiful. So I'm excited because it's the first time I've really seen this much snow in downtown Canton. It's actually really pretty.
Excellent. Well, anyway, let's kick this off. I see we're on the live stream. I want to welcome all the Apex Chasers. This is our 8th installment of the Disruptor segment of the Apex podcast. And even though the main focus of our podcast is typically around digital disruption and what's going on in the industry around digital businesses and design thinking and empathetic selling and things like that, I think everyone would agree that 2020 has pitched us the mother of all disruptive curveballs, so to speak. And as a result, I thought it would be we should kick off the 2021 season of the Disruptor podcast in this live stream with a bit of motivation from a gentleman named Garry Guller. He's a motivational speaker. He's an athlete. He's an author. He's an Ironman. He's an ultra marathoner. He's a Mountaineer Extronar. And so we have the great pleasure of bringing him in. But before we do, we have a lot to explore with Garry today. But before we do that, I'd like to just, Jan's going to run a short 2-minute film clip from ABC World News.
Awesome. This is exciting. I'm starting to feel like Jamie from Joe Rogan. We're getting there, John. We're leveling up. All right. I'm going to play this video. All right.
Two stories tonight about human achievement and the quest for overcoming obstacles, and they come from the sports of mountain climbing and golf. Mountain climbing first, and Mount Everest, which has fascinated man for centuries. It is foreboding, it is beautiful, it is mysterious. ABC's Mark Litke is at Mount Everest.
It's been a remarkable week of firsts on the world's highest peak, but perhaps the most inspiring first today was that of 36-year-old American Garry Guller, who lost his left arm in a climbing accident 4 years ago. He had led a team of Texans with disabilities on a grueling 17-day trek to Everest Base Camp, a remarkable Everest first in its own right. But then Guller immediately began his own assault on the summit, the first attempt by a climber with one arm. It was treacherous from the start, as fierce winds slowed his team's advance for days.
We're experiencing some pretty long winds and pretty sucked in with clouds.
But as fast as it deteriorates, weather can suddenly improve on Everest, and after a 17-hour final push today, Garry Guller stood on top of the world.
Wow.
Awesome. So I am super excited to have on our show someone that I believe truly exudes the Apex tagline, Jan. Ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Again, ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. Easy for me to say. Anyway, a little bit about Garry. He was featured as an award-winning documentary filmmaker in a film called Team Everest, A Himalayan Journey, and was the climbing advisor for a documentary called Sherpa Stew. Both of them I've watched, and they're excellent. I would highly recommend them. He's also a co-author of a book called Make Others Greater, From Mount Everest to the Boardroom, Vital Lessons from Dynamic Innovators, Explorers, and Everyday Heroes that will inspire the way you lead. In addition, Garry is also the founder of Make Others Greater. It's a U.S. 501c3 not-for-profit that's serving remote areas around the world, including Nepal, with medical supplies, school supplies, and healthcare initiatives. So please welcome to the Disruptor, Mr. Garry Guller.
Hey, everyone. Good morning. Nice seeing you guys.
Namaste, Garry. Thank you for joining us.
You know, it's, I tell you, John, I've known you for a long time, and I swear to you, to everyone, even now, when I watch that ABC World News Tonight clip and I hear my name and Charlie Gibson and Mount Everest and the summit and the team that went to base camp, you know, I hope the feeling never goes away. My hands still get sweaty. And I've watched this thing 20,000 times. My heart starts beating really fast. And, you know, it's just, I mean, there are a number of bumps along the journey for sure, but ultimately there was success. And I'm just honored to share the story and start my week out, start my morning out, you know, at this level. So it's great to be here.
Well, good. Thank you. Yeah, I tell you what, in prepping for this show, I got real nostalgic and really sort of want to go back to Nepal if I can, you know, one of these days. It's a really special place. But anyway, hey, I have another podcasting friend of mine that always says that everyone was born into someone else's story. And obviously you have a great story. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of I'll let you give a little bit of background, particularly even a little before the actual accident, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, not at all. I was a teenager, right? And I was a bit of a free spirit kind of teenager. And, you know, basically somebody took me rock climbing one day and I really got into it, really enjoyed it. And back in those days, you know, this was in the 70s, right? In the Southeast down in Carolina. And there wasn't many of us out on the rock, and we looked a little bit different from kind of everybody else in a way. And a lot of people, especially in the Southeast, they weren't really quite sure how to sort of take sort of the rock climbing community back then. And I just really got into it. And some really wonderful. I mean, they were probably old guys, you know, they were 18 or 19 at the time, right? Took me under their wing and just kind of showed me the ropes, and not just necessarily the ropes literally on the rock face, but kind of another way of looking at life and how you should appreciate, you know, the feeling that you get when you're in nature, when you're on the rock, when the sun is on your back and you get to the top, and then you sort of enjoy and celebrate, you know, together. And one of my first jobs, John, was, and I still stay in touch with this gentleman. And one of my first jobs was as a assistant for a nonprofit. And what we did, we went to a very, very poor side of town, and we would take some kids that either, you know, had lost their father or their mother or didn't have any parents at all. We would take them on a rock climb, just way out of their environment. Just a short, you know, climb and a short rappel. And you know, I was fascinated, even at, God, I was 15, I think, maybe 16 at that time. But I was so fascinated when you would see these kids that really had never experienced anything like that in their life ever. And their eyes would light up, and then they would smile, and then you would hear them talking about it as you was, you know, descending down the trail back to this van that we had hired. And just like, they were just way over the moon. And, you know, my hope that just that experience, you know, offered them some, I don't know, some self-motivation, some like success, you know, just something different out of their norm. And, you know, from then on, really up until the accident, you know, I just continued to climb and made multiple trips out west, went to Europe, and always was searching for sort of colder weather, deeper snow, and, you know, kind of pushing the boundaries as much as I could. And then, of course, you know, when I put the expedition together with some friends down into Mexico, you know, my whole life, I mean, it came to an abrupt end, you know, on Pico de Orizaba, quickly.
So yeah, tell us about that. Obviously you were in Mexico. How old were you again? I
think I was 19. I always say 20, but I think I was 19.
So you were still a baby.
I was still a baby, you know, but we put this expedition together. We were going to do the 3 volcanoes there. And, you know, our first one was Pico de Orizaba. I'm there with a few friends. And, you know, it was kind of back in those days, you know, it wasn't that you just wrote the check, hopped on a plane, and you went to the Himalayas or you went to the Alps. Really, there was some, I think, much more respect in a sense that if you really wanted to climb in the Himalaya, you really needed to kind of pay your dues a bit. And, you know, Mexico was kind of that next step. And then, of course, we had South America on the calendar for soon thereafter. And then, of course, hopefully into Europe, into the Alps. And then, you know, maybe, you know, God willing, to the Himalayas. And, but I'm near the very top of Orizaba. I could see I mean, I could see the summit, and I mean, it's hard now to really still talk about it. But if you can imagine was every color that your brain can come up with, right? That's how it seemed to me at that time. I had never been this high in my life, and I saw the summit. I knew, and I remember thinking, it's like, my God, Gary, this is that next step. You know, this is that next step. And as soon as I had that thought, my friend yells out, "Guller, I'm falling, Guller, I'm falling." And I looked back very quickly behind me, and he had basically come off this little ice step and was falling backwards. So I immediately went down into the ice to try to stop his fall with my ice axe, and we're hooked together, tied together on the same rope team. And before I could do that, he pulled me off the ice, and then I pulled my climbing partner and best buddy off the ice. And God, 1,500, maybe 1,600 feet later, we just stopped. And on the second day, I lost my best friend. And, you know, and thankfully, you know, a day and a half after that, some folks found us. And, you know, my family was on the East Coast, so they flew me basically to Duke University as fast as they could. And my other friend went to California. His family was in San Jose. And, you know, the doctor coming in after sort of laying there for a few months and saying, you know, I've been a neurosurgeon for 30 plus years, and the damage is so extensive in your spinal cord that your left arm and your shoulder is never going to be the same, and it's never going to come back. And, you know, as you were saying, you know, I was 19, 20 years old, you know, I was a kid. I was a kid. I just wanted to climb freaking mountains and travel the world and experience people and culture and lands. I never thought I'd be laying on my back and a neurosurgeon coming in. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to hear from anyone in my life. And I was lost, man. I was lost for a number of years after that.
I can imagine. I mean, talk about the ultimate disruption as a 20-year-old, right? You've got your whole, I was doing some climbing in the Sierras at that time, in the 70s. And you know, they were mostly 14,000 foot, 13,000 foot peaks. But I mean, yeah, I was fortunate. Nothing ever catastrophic happened, but a couple close calls where a climbing friend of mine was above me and, you know, stepped on a loose rocks, and a big rock avalanche would come tumbling down, and, you know, fortunately, you know, would go by me by a foot or two. But, you know, if it was a 6 inches one way or the other, I could have easily been down at the bottom of that slope as well. So amazing story. And so tell us what happened. So obviously you're 20 years old. They amputate your arm. You still got I'm 62 years old and I still got the climbing bug, right? So I know you can't get it out of your system. And I am nothing compared to what the kind of stuff you were doing. So then what happens?
Then, you know, like I said, talking about, yes, I was this disruptor for a number of years. I mean, when I look back, you know, I was just doing things that I can't even imagine. I'm just not proud of that period of my life. And it went on for, you know, 4 or 5 years, too long, really. And I eventually said, you know what, enough is enough. I'm starting over. And I went back to where I was born. I went back to England and just wanted really to start a whole nother life, and not necessarily at that time, really, I didn't want to be associated. You know, there was press about the accident. You know, a lot of people knew about it. It was like, that almost defined me. And I was like, I'm not tired of telling the story back then, but it seemed like that was the only thing people wanted to hear. So I decided just to start again. And my grandfather was still alive at the time, and he lived in England. And I remember he came up to me one day, and he knew that I had been up to no good. And he looked at me, you know, and he put these big British builders' hands around my face, and he was like, Gary, he's like, you got to get your shit together. And if there's not a person in the world that has climbed some of the highest mountains with one arm, he said, be the first. And, you know, that's when it started. I mean, I started then going to North Wales, Scotland, with meeting new friends. And then, you know, a mountaineer sort of took me under his wing for a short time, and we adapted and tried different things. And then eventually got in the mid 90s, I got that opportunity to go to the Himalayas, and life hasn't been the same since on so many levels, right? Just my first minute landing in Kathmandu, I mean, in a sense, that was almost enough. That was almost enough. And then to go on your first trek and then try to, I was on a Lhotse expedition back in 97 and really fail, but learn a lot at the same time, and meeting the Sherpa people, as you know, and the culture and the colors and the cuisine and even the smoky tuk-tuks, right? Just, it was what I needed in my life. It was what I needed to kickstart, relight, that positive avalanche, I call it sometimes, right? Just relight yourself again. And, and I kept going back. I mean, I was hooked, and, and I still keep going back so much as I could. And to be able to tie, part of my sort of adventure life into and with the corporate world, and then with the nonprofit, and, try to do some good, I think, in the world. I don't know if there is a better way for me anyway, a better way to live.
Cool.
I'm going to kind of hop in on this portion here, John.
Okay.
So and John has heard this story hundreds of times. I was a borderline also getting into some things that I probably shouldn't be getting into as a teenager, right? Yeah. And
so we're disruptors.
Started getting caught, and I essentially had the same conversation with my grandfather. Right, he was actually the one that pulled me out of my pit, and told me, "Get your shit together." He's the one that told me, you're going to join the Air Force. And I always say my grandpa pulled a card that is irreversible, because he's on his deathbed, and he said, "This is my final wish."
Oops.
And so I have his dog tags tattooed on my chest. I go to visit him in the cemetery at least once a quarter, because talking to that man is my entire inspiration for everything that I do. So I wanted to say, Gary, I 110% feel that when you said that, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. And then for all of us, as what I really view as our charge as disruptors is to be that person that sparks a conversation like our grandfather sparked with us to other people, because sometimes people get so caught in the weeds of their own lives that they need that objective vision to come in from the outside and repaint what they're capable of and readjust their lenses, adjust their prescription on their glasses so they can see more clearly. And the fact that went through what you did, you had that period of time where you're off track, and then you get ripped back by an objective person like your grandfather. And then both of us, and there's so many millions of other people out there that have experienced the same thing, feel this now burning passion and this charge to go at and impact lives. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that, that really just emotionally punched me in the face. So I'm grateful for that on an amazing Monday morning here on Disruptor.
Cool.
All right, on.
So back to the corporate world you mentioned. So a little story about how you and I first met. I think it was 2010. So I think you were still relatively early in the motivational speaking gig. I think we were at an IBM regional sales kickoff meeting of some sort. If you probably don't remember, I had just been promoted to management. So I had, if you will, needless to say, was facing what I would call a Everest caliber challenge of trying to lead a sales team here in the Eastern United States. And you gave your pitch, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But that was great, and obviously you hit my mountaineering bug, a chord, if you will. But what was really cool, and you, to be honest, you were the one that motivated me to get to Nepal in 2014. But what I really enjoyed about meeting you is at the end we sat around a table, we had a couple of beers. I don't know if you remember this. We shot the shit. And, we were talking. I mean, the thing about climbers, Jan, or mountaineers, is we can talk about mountains all day long, right? Well, and it's just one of those things. It's sort of, I don't know what it is. It gets in our blood, and we will sit there and we'll BS for it. So that was sort of how you and I met, and that was 2010-ish. So it's been almost 11 now, almost 11 years, over 11 years or over 10 years. So anyway, that's sort of the backstory on my end. But what I wanted to get to next, obviously, is the expedition. So you, as you say, were probably probably the leader of the most diverse team ever to reach Everest Base Camp. And for those of you that aren't into the mountaineering world, Everest Base Camp in itself is a feat. It's of 17,598 feet. So I mean, it's way higher than any mountain I've ever climbed. And so tell us a little bit about the how you came up with the idea. That's what really got me. In my world, we'd call that a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG.
Right.
And a little bit about the team and what you did and how it came about, right? And because it's fascinating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks for just everything you just said, John. And I just want to also, I mean, I got to give a shout out to the organization you work with, IBM. IBM's been a huge supporter of me over the years. I mean, from the very, very get-go. It's one of just a handful of the early companies way back in 2003 that, invited me to their campus there in Austin, Texas, and said they, wanted to be involved with the messaging with the expedition. And, their only sort of requirement was that I wasn't allowed to say that they were a sponsor, but they didn't have a problem with me saying that they were a partner. And they wanted me to come back, if it was successful, to come back to the one of my first presentations, the lunch cafeteria in Austin, Texas, and just share the story with them. And I mean, I could go on for an hour then, or more. I could go for hours about then who I met at that presentation that I did, and how our friendship developed, and then how I was invited to Florida, and then some other senior people at IBM saw me, invited me to another event that led me to our monk, and then it went on and on and on. So I'm grateful to IBM for their support and their continued support. I mean, for sure. But it kind of in a nutshell, I was invited. I tried Everest in 2001, and I didn't make it very far. I mean, honestly, physically I thought I was okay, but mentally I just wasn't there in the right headspace, And I remember getting off the plane. I was living in Austin at the time, getting off the plane, and there were a lot of people from the community just kind of rooting me on and telling me how I inspired them, not because of how far I got on Everest, but because I got on the plane and actually just tried, and I got invited a few weeks after that to give a slideshow out in West Texas in El Paso. And at the end of that little, basically PowerPoint, here's the Rockies, here's Mexico, here's Europe, the lights came on in the back of the room. I saw this gentleman, and he could only move one part of his body, but I could tell he wanted to ask me a question. And I walked to the back of the room and I said, "Yes, sir, what is your question?" And I could see it was a person with quadriplegia and had limited movement. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Guller, would you ever take somebody like me to some of the places that you've been to?"
Oh,
right. And immediately, in my mind, I was like, not only does he have this pretty severe physical challenge, I think he's a little bit freaking nuts too. Right. And we're great friends.
Fits right in with us, right?
Yeah. Right. And he is a little bit, he's a lot crazy, but
gotta be. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful person. But, and then, I thought about it, and, I always say that one of the greatest lessons I've learned from the Sherpa people is that they have this wonderful ability to look beyond what they see in a human being. They have this ability to look towards somebody's heart first, and not look towards somebody's heart, but they have a wonderful ability. You feel like they're looking at you and to your heart and inside of your soul. And, I thought about it, and I was so inspired by this event, because it was an event on equality and equal access and accessibility, and half the people in the audience had some sort of physical or cognitive challenge. But it wasn't just those people that inspired me. It was their employers were there, their teammates were there, their partners or husbands or wives. They were all there. And it was just this collective force of like just compassion and kindness and love, and just people wanting to explore and try to have whatever a normal life is, but have an equal life to somebody, let's say, that doesn't have a physical or a cognitive challenge, or as much as possible. And I decided I want to go back to Everest. And I was so blown away by this event that I decided, I want to take a group of people representing just about every type of person you can possibly imagine, including those with physical challenges, including those who've never been on a freaking camping trip before. And, I didn't really know how to do things back in those days. At that time, I think I was like minus $275 in the bank. But I, did my research, and I put out this little PSA. It probably wasn't in the right format or anything. And but one radio station picked up on it and said, I'm going back to Everest, and I want to take a team with me. And within 4 or 5 weeks, I probably had a team of 30 members, and 14 of those had varying degrees of physical and cognitive challenges. And again, I mean, I'm very appreciative of the better situation I'm in now, but I'm not joking at all. I had minus $300 in the bank, and I had this idea and this team all ready to go, and I put pencil to paper, and this thing was going to cost near $3, $4, $5, almost $500,000.
I'd imagine.
So you imagine, I got to go knocking on some doors, right? And I hadn't been in Texas for very long, and people that understand Texas will get this. Texas is one of the greatest states, I think, in the country, because once you get into the sort of, I think, the corporate world, the business folks, and you earn their trust, they never forget that. And that is so very true. But it takes a while. And at that time, my hair was a little long. I had this funky sort of English, Carolina, Texas, global accent. I don't think I owned a pair of shoes at the time. And imagine, you're a CFO. I mean, you'll get this job, or Jan, you're a CFO of an organization, and then through the door comes this guy with shorts, long hair, his hair pulled back, some old like Varnage from the 70s, and sits down in front of you and says, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. CFO. My name's Garry Guller. I got this great idea, and I need you to get involved with it." Okay, yes, sir. Please tell what your story is. Well, I'm going to be the first guy to stand on top of the world with one arm. And you know what? Before that, I'm going to lead the largest diverse team ever to Mount Everest Base Camp. Some of the folks are in wheelchairs. How about writing me a check for $500,000? Right?
Woo, man! I thought I've had some tough pitches in my life. That is, but the thing is that like you're saying that, and I'm connecting with it because I mean I walk in boots, jeans, belt buckle, I'm just me. You walk in, you're just you. And the thing I think is beautiful, and what you're going to really give people confidence to do after this episode, is understand, if you truly are passionate, 110% believe in an idea, and sometimes it's just walking by faith and not by what you can see, because there's going to be like, somehow this is going to come together. I don't know how, but this is what is on my heart to get done. Something like the bricks are going to lay themselves. And that was to give you the confidence to go into a room like that. And then those CFOs are looking back and saying, "Is this dude nuts? I feel like, is he serious?" But then at the same time, they're like, in order to have that much conviction, you have to be ready to take it all the way through. And so I would actually probably say that there's a little bit of confidence, or at least curiosity, that gets spiked on their end. They're like, what if it is possible?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. I mean, I think the number one, it took me a little while, because I was like, why are you not going to be part of this? I can't understand why you would not want to be part of this. But I didn't know the whole deal about really sponsorships, at this level, and partnerships. And, I had a number of folks, and, I've mentioned the organizations before that said, hey, they'd be happy. I mean, financially, it was a tough proposition, in the sense that things can go horribly wrong, right? In the mountains, mountaineering, altitude, even flying, getting there, etc.
Getting to Lukla alone is a life-threatening, risky adventure, right?
Yes, I mean, totally, right. And what company wants to see, their logo or their corporate name, on 27 expedition bags, 3,000 feet down in the bottom of the canyon with a few people laying beside them? That's not a real good image to project, right? But I did figure out really quickly, I had a number of organizations that said, explain to me why they couldn't financially get involved as a sponsor, but they could get involved as a partner. And, I was born at night, but I'll tell you guys, I wasn't born last night. And once I figured that part out, I was like, okay, well, I can start leveraging these partnerships into perhaps some other people that don't mind either anonymously throwing in some cash. And basically that's how it finally came together. And barely.
So tell the audience like how, because I know exactly how, I sort of know the proportion of trekkers to porters to Sherpas, right? So, but give the people a little feel of, you had how many people were you trying to take up? I forget. It's 16.
Well,
No,
yes, we had 30 sort of
30.
we had 30. We had 28 Westerners, and then I just didn't want it to be just about Americans, right? Or even we had a couple of Canadians as well. We also had 2 Sherpa.
Those guys were awesome, man. I met so many people like that. Those 2 that you had in the movie. I'll send you a picture. I swear to God, I met the guy's brother, right?
Right. No, of course, and he probably was related. I mean, all the Sherpa generally are the same family. But yeah, I mean, one of the guys, both were bitten by cobras in the village. So one guy had, and that's a quick amputation in the village when you get bitten by a cobra. So one guy he was missing his right arm, and the other guy was missing his left leg. And they are also part of the expedition. And I swear on my life, I remember we were at a hotel near Boardroom in Kathmandu, and I had never met these gentlemen before, but Nima Dawa Sherpa, a dear friend of mine, had told me about these gentlemen before. So I kind of knew what to expect. But think about this. So the floors in the Hyatt Hotel actually are not marble, but there's some rock or something very, very slippery. And this guy is probably 60 years old. He is missing his leg, and he comes from the village, and he cannot even walk through the foyer there in the hotel because his crutches are made of just wood with no like rubber slip or nothing under his shoulders. So he's walking and he's sliding on these heavily waxed floors. And, finally he made it over, and we all sat in a chair, and all the team came there, and, we were like, we at least made it to Kathmandu, so we got to get up into the hills there pretty soon. But when we landed up into Lukla, as you mentioned, John, I mean, Lukla's a short takeoff and landing airstrip. The damn thing's about 73 feet long, right? And then the runway is a mountain face, and the other end, when you depart the village, on this short takeoff and landing airstrip, is about a 3,000 foot drop off. So you start having a whole another appreciation for when you land brakes and for when you take off acceleration, right? Yeah. And so immediately we had 30, made it to Lukla, and then I had sent Sherpa up in advance. So in the very early stages of this expedition, at any one given time, I had over 300 people working for this team.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that's a pretty good. I mean, even our trip was the proportions to trekkers to porters to Sherpas was quite large, and you obviously needed more people. So let's get back to Everest. So obviously you get this team up there, and it's amazing. You break a world record, but at that point you're like, most of us would have turned around and gone home. But you obviously decided that the next thing to do was to try to scale the peak. And you became the first person with one arm to climb Mount Everest. Now, again, Mount Everest is 29,028 feet, so it's another 10,000 feet above base camp. But to start off, when you start off from base camp to get to Camp 1, right, you've got to go across the treacherous and infamous Kumbar Icefall. And I think you've got a really neat story about your trip, and you were with, it's Nima Dawa, is that how you say his name?
Yes.
Nima Dawa is your Sherpa that helped you through the expedition, and I think you had an experience on the icefall that was probably pretty inspiring.
It's like, I still, even when I even share the story now, even when Nima and myself talk about the story, right, it's still hard to believe how it all sort of unfolded. But where we left base camp, and you leave very early because you want to get through the ice fall when the ice is very hard. But that ice fall is one of the scariest places in the world. I mean, there's crevasses you can't see the bottoms of. You have to cross these crevasses on these like old rickety ladders, and there's there's avalanches that are happening. It's moving. It's its own life force, really. And I mean, a lot of people heard a few years back, when we lost almost 20 Sherpa in one avalanche. That's 20 Sherpas and 20 Sherpa families, kids, wives, husbands. It's scary. And we're about halfway through the ice fall, and we hear this boom, boom, boom. And it's the sounds you don't want to hear when you're in the ice fall, because generally that means that something broke somewhere, right? And we both stopped, and we looked up, we looked around, and we couldn't see where it was, but we knew that wasn't a good sound to hear. So we tried to pick up our pace as much as you can, like at 18 and 19,000 feet for the first time. And then we heard it again. It was like boom, boom, boom. But it was like 3 times as loud, 3 times as long. And we looked up, and at the top of the ice fall, this avalanche is coming directly toward Nima, Sherpa, and myself. And I mean, honestly, at that time, I thought it's over. Bloody hell, you've come all this way. You're very successful with the team, getting them to base camp with some enjoyment and some happiness. And Gary, before you get to Camp 1, your life is done. And Nima put his arms around me, and he thought the same. And I put my arms around him, and it was like just before the impact of this avalanche was about to hit us. Nima just, he let go, reached into his pocket, and he threw something 3 times in the path of the avalanche. And then he quickly came back and he put his arms around me. And honestly, it seemed like a lifetime. I mean, it was maybe 6 seconds, 7 seconds. And then everything just stopped. Everything, and it was so quiet. I mean, so very quiet. And I opened up my eyes and I looked at Nima, and I could barely see him because of all the debris, but I knew he was still attached to me, and me, obviously him. And I wouldn't say laugh about it now because but we're grateful, but we both thought at that time, this is where you go. We thought maybe this is heaven, right? We couldn't see anything else. It's just this big cloud of like snow, dust, and ice. And we're like, this is it. And then it settled, and then we realized that we made it and we were alive. And as I'm dusting off the snow and the ice from Nima's helmet and his shoulders, I looked at him and I said, Nima, what did you throw in the path of that avalanche? I watched you. You threw something 3 times very, very quickly. And apparently when I went back to Kathmandu to say goodbye to the base camp team, he went back to this village by the name of Pangboche and paid a very old man. And when I mean that old man, I don't mean like this guy's like 58. I mean, this guy's like 558. And he's a lama. He's sort of a spiritual leader for the Khumbu Valley. And Nima went back to see that man, and he asked that man for a special blessing. And that 60-plus-year-old man gave him some rice, and he told Nima, if danger comes your way, throw this rice 3 times in the path of the danger, and you'll be all right. I mean, I still have some rice I carry with me sometimes, but was it the rice? I don't know.
Dude, I'd be carrying rice too.
Right?
Man.
Or was it that old man, But I tell you, over the years, especially now, I think this story has even a greater meaning now. I mean, we've had one massive avalanche last year, and it's like a continuing avalanche still going into this year. But what I got from that whole near-death experience was that Nima believed in that rice, and Nima believed in that old man, and Nima believed in me, and I equally believed in him. And that is what got us through. Simple belief in yourself and belief in others. Because here's the gig, right? If Nima would have went this way, and I would have looked after myself and went the other way, I would not be here this morning sharing this story. We stuck together through what was almost certainly a dying situation. But we stuck together, we remained calm, but we continued to believe in ourselves. And that's why I'm here. And that's why we're still friends. And that's why we're still together. And I think in the whole world now, people have to start believing back in themselves and into other people, especially as we crawl out of this massive continued pandemic avalanche, right?
100%. I'm going to pull up some pictures for just because our audience, I feel like, may not be as quite well versed in the climbing. And so I know I had to do a little bit of research into the actual pathway. So I'm going to pull up a picture here that actually shows a little bit of where that path is. So right there, we can see that Khumbu icefall above base camp. But that's really the first step. You're entering the journey into actually climbing. I mean,
Exactly.
that's kind of the first thing that you guys are going to have to get through. So your journey was almost over before it even started.
Exactly.
It was.
Way up. And then there's go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to say, the one thing that we didn't mention is, it took Garry and his team about 3 weeks to get from Lukla up to base camp, the team of the expedition team. But then you just don't turn around and start climbing base Everest. Right? I think you spent probably another 2 or 3, probably 4 weeks up on the mountain to just right there, because you spend a week or two acclimating, and then you do a couple of practice climbs. You at least today you go up to camp 1, come back down, right? And so then you get to camp 2, and of course then you got to deal with the weather and the weather windows. So we're talking about 3 weeks on the trek to base camp, and then another 4 weeks trying to summit the mountain. So at that point in time, you're basically out there for about 2 months.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, this is a major commitment of time. There's Diwa Sherpa. And speaking of Sherpas, while you're pulling that up, I want to talk to you. I got to give a shout out to the Sherpas that I worked with, because when I was in Nepal, we had 3 Sherpas and 5 porters, and our trekking company was organized or run by a guy named Ang Jangbu Sherpa, but our lead Sherpa was a guy named Lapsang Sherpa. And we had 2 other, and he was older than I am. So he was probably, at the time, close to 60, maybe even over that. And again, you would never know, right? I mean, he could run up and down those mountains like there was no tomorrow. And then we had a couple of younger guys, Punru Sherpa and Joe Baharu. Punru was excellent. He actually spent some time in the United States, up in your part of the world, in Washington, Oregon. He climbed Mount Hood a couple of times. He's climbed Kilimanjaro. But a little funny story, just as a reminder. So we're on the second day. The first day is pretty easy. The second day, we're starting to get some terrain. And as Lapsang used to tell us, you never go flat in Nepal. You're either going up or you're going down. Right?
little up, little down.
Yeah. And it's what you got. You'd walk up 1,000 or 2,000 feet, and you'd come around this turn, and all of a sudden you got to go all the way back down the other side to cross some bridge, across some river. But so we're trekking along, and my buddy's with me, and he says, "Hey, Punru, have you ever done this trek before?" And I goes, "No, this is my first time." And we were going to the Annapurna Sanctuary, so we were eventually going to get up to Montepachori Base Camp, and then up to Annapurna Base Camp. And we're sort of scratching our head. And he goes, "Yeah, no, I don't normally do this. I'm normally, my day job, if you will, is I do Everest trips." So my buddy goes, "Well, have you ever climbed Everest?" And he goes, "Yeah, 7 times." And today, I believe he's got 3 more. So I think he's up to 9 or 10 times up Everest. The guy was great. But so that's, my story about Sherpas. And I want to come back eventually to the avalanche, but you have some, I mean, you were talking about the Sherpas that work with you. I think one of the things you mentioned is you started to allude to this sort of the power of the Sherpas and how, I mean, it's clearly impacted me. I've kept in touch with these guys, and I'll give another story on the avalanche in a second, but let's spend some time on the Sherpas because they're just incredible people.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a week that goes by that I'm not speaking to some Sherpa somewhere. But of course, I stay in touch with Nima because he sort of looks after some of the operational stuff for the foundation in Nepal. But something I don't know if you the very early days when I started learning about Sherpa people, I always like, where's this word Sherpa from, right? Where's this Sherpa come from? I don't even know this word, right? I mean, I've heard of Sherpa, but you never hear it. But a lot of people don't realize Sherpa actually comes from a Tibetan word, which means which is Sharwa, and Shar in Tibetan is east, and Wa is something from the east, and all the Sherpa came from Eastern Tibet, right? And English people, or Westerners had a problem pronouncing Sharwa. It turned into Sherpa, right? And I just love sharing that story with folks, especially those out there who never realized, like, where does that name come from, Sherpa? But something that was incredible and an incredible experience. And you brought it up earlier, John, that when we arrived to base camp with this team, I mean, it was one of the most wonderful days of my life. I mean, by far up there for sure. I mean, you used to see the smiles, completion, the laughter, the like, these people have been told no most of their life, most of them, either from birth or from after their injury. No, 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 no. And now they're at Mount Everest Base Camp at 17,500 plus feet, right? But so I called down on the sat phone to my Russian friend. He flies these big Mi-17 helicopters, and I wanted him to bring the helicopter up the next morning very close to base camp, because we had to get back down to Kathmandu. This phase of the expedition was over. When I hung up the sat phone, Nima Dower Sherpa jumps into my tent. He's like, Guller, I've got this great idea. Hey, before we all get to the helicopter tomorrow, why don't we all go ice climbing in the ice fall, right?
Yeah.
And excuse my hair there, folks. I remember looking at Nima and I said, Nima, can't we be happy with the success we just achieved? Why do we need to go ice climbing tomorrow? And that's when I knew he got it. I mean, Nima came from a village. He was the poorest family in the village. His father died when he was a very young man. He was carrying like 40 kilos of salt from Tibet to the Indian border. And I mean, he was known as the dirty boy in the village. And that's when I knew he got it. He said, Gary, look how far we've come. Look how far we've come. I can set up some safety line on this ice wall 100 feet from here. Let's at least give it a shot. Let's give it a try. And I woke everybody up the next morning. He's down at the bottom of the Kubo ice wall. He had set some safety line up on this, 40, 50 foot ice serac wall. And every single member of the expedition finally got over to the bottom of this ice wall and made it up to the very, very top. And if you're wondering, well, how the guys and the girls do it that were in the wheelchair? Well, the guys that had enough strength in their arms just pulled themselves up the face, up the safety line. And the ones that didn't, they just sort of made the movement that they wanted to give it a try. And it was like, this is what I sort of call Sherpa power. And it was like, oh, my Sherpa friends and even other members of the team got around the person and assisted them. I mean, it was like top of the world teamwork, and not being corny with that expression, but assisted them in a way that they almost didn't even realize that people were giving them the extra help. And when you become a natural extension to somebody's desire, I think you said at the very start of the conversation, Jan, that when you can be part of somebody's desire to try something new or succeed or become happier or achieve something they didn't think they could do before without them knowing about that to me is a gift. And
that ripple effect has to be absolutely insane. I mean, the like you said, I actually was just talking to my little brother last night because I'm working on a book. And me, Gary, you and I may need to talk about co-writing a chapter in this thing because it's going to be called Permission to Dream, 10 Keys to Unlocking Your True Self. And I'm going to pull up this picture that, talking about the smiles and just helping out. This is not the ice fall, but for people to get kind of an idea, we've got lines pulling up, people literally just willing to try to enable that dream to happen.
So in the movie, this is the guy that's climbing up the ice fall. So if you ever have a chance to go watch the movie, this is the scene where this is a scene where he's climbing up the mountain or up the trail, but on the ice fall or on the ice, he's being pulled up by the Sherpas. And it's the look on his face is unbelievable because he is realizing that, like you said, people have told him forever, you can't do this, you can't do this. And all of a sudden he's at 17,000 feet ice climbing in a wheelchair. I mean, think about that. That's like when you're having a bad day.
Living your life in a way, and Gary is just embodying this principle to the utmost degree, right? And living your life in a way where if you can become a positive ripple in another person's life, right? And I'm huge on this. The reason why I'm calling it Permission to Dream is I'm saying the dreaming takes practice. And it takes a mentor to kind of allow you to show you how high a dream can actually be and still be achievable. I think we're in this weird place in the world where we've set too many high bars when you shouldn't really set a top bar. You just set your low bar, set your minimum standard of excellence, and then don't even worry about how high you can go because you might end up at 17,000 feet. You don't know. And taking that person who has not believed in themselves to 17,000 feet just allows that entire network that person interacts with to now have permission to dream. You're giving people permission to dream. And that is just, John, every single guest that you've brought on here has blown my mind. But as much as this is like a perfect way to start out 2021, perfect way to start out a Monday. I mean, I'm ready to go like kill all of these Excel spreadsheets that I need to do today. I am just beyond myself. It's like, Garry, thank you so much for coming.
That was the hope here. Like I said, we all need a little motivation after last year's disruptive year. I'm going to try something, Jan. I'm going to try and share the screen. See if I can do this. Browser is blocked. Your screen icon in the address bar below. How do I do that? Shoot. Is there a way I can do this, or what am I doing wrong? Browser is blocked. Your screen. Maybe I may have pop-up windows blocked or something. Anyway, oh shoot. Anyway, I'll send it. Maybe we can include it in the re-record. But I've got a picture up on my screen. So as I mentioned earlier, I want to come back to this sort of another story, and I promise there's a segue in that's interesting. I hope to one of your other works, Sherpa Stew. But so as I mentioned earlier, we trekked up to Montepachuri Base Camp and then up to Annapurna in February of 2004. And then on our way back down from Montepachuri Base Camp to Dublin, where we were, I think, either sleeping or having tea or lunch or something. We were coming back down, and as the trail that we had just crossed over not 24 to 36 hours earlier was totally gone and wiped out by an avalanche. And I'm talking about a path of snow that was probably 50 to 100 yards long. And of course, upwards and downwards in the mountain was just nothing but this rock and ice snow. And like I said, if I could figure out how to show, I got a great picture of it, sort of in perspective of our team. But this was back to the Sherpas, this was the only time that I saw Lobsang Sherpa actually visibly like worried, right? Nothing fazed him during the whole trip. Not taking us sort of old cranky old men up to the top of base camp down. But this, he saw this and he like all of a sudden got ultra serious and said, because it was the only way we could get, right? We had to go across the path or the trail that was no longer there. So we had to like scurry across this 50 to 100 yard avalanche, and had no idea if that avalanche had come 5 minutes ago but we certainly knew it had just come within 24 hours. So we scurry across that avalanche, and that like really, opened my eyes up to the avalanche experience that you described, that actually sort of segues into April 18th, 2014. I was actually in New York City on business, and I woke up that morning, and that was the tragic avalanche on the icefall that killed 16 Sherpas. And as I mentioned earlier, the guys we were with, their day job, if you will, was Everest, not the Annapurna circuit. And so 3 of the Sherpas were up there somewhere at Everest, base camp, Camp 1. I didn't know. Fortunately, none of them were injured or hurt, but what I learned, and the reason I go through this whole sort of story, is because now I realized after watching Sherpa Stew that there's this very large community of Sherpas in New York. And obviously one of them for a while was Dewa Sherpa. And, just thought you'd give a little bit of, I'm curious on sort of the why and the how and, why there. That actually looks just like the one we had, although that's different.
That's the Kumbo icefall there. And it's very hard to actually picture in your. So if you look at the bottom of that picture, it's going to take you probably 6 to 8 hours to get to about the mid-range, and there could be 1,000 people in that icefall, right? There could be, let's say, 250 people in that icefall. You would find it very difficult to pick them out. It's just the scale, as the Himalaya, the scale, and until you see them for the first time, right? The scale of the Himalaya is just what always just takes my breath and my heart away. But yeah, no, thanks for bringing that. There are thousands and thousands of Sherpa in the New York community,
I had
and
no idea until I watched the segment on where they were, you know, in their, I don't know what you call it, a temple or their
exactly
place of worship, you know, grieving, if you will, for their community of the people that were you know, died in the ice fall.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big loss. I mean, it's a huge loss. I mean, because as they all are somewhat connected, and most every Sherpa knows the other Sherpa in some way, maybe not directly, but indirectly, right? But I mean, it was a very sad time, and I think history, and I think it just sort of shined, you know, the focus on just how dangerous and difficult. When things are going well, they're going super good for everyone, but things when they turn bad, they can have devastating effects. But you know, the Sherpa, they have a wonderful way of bouncing back and trying to make even the very worst situations okay with it. You know, we've all lost Sherpas in the mountains or on expeditions before for a variety of reasons, and you know, it's hard. I mean, it's just always hard. But you know, it takes you know, one trip. Maybe one day, John, we'll head up to Queens, and I'll give you an evening with Keepa or with Nima or Lakpa or somebody, and you know, just bring your big boy pants on, because they like to sometimes drink a lot of light beer.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'll fit right in.
But yeah, I mean, they you know, I feel very, very fortunate, you know, back in the mid 90s, you know, I mean, I got you know, Keepa Sherpa, you know, his first visa, you know, into the US, and since then his wife now has permanent residence. His daughter is over here. She's married. She's an officer in the Air Force. His other daughter is here finishing university, and you know, to go and watch them grow up and mature and become, you know, just good human beings in the world. I mean, that was just a blessing. But to go back to Queens, and the stories are there. You sit on the floor, you share stories, because these people I have known for what, 20 years plus. And it's like, it just, I mean, you can hopefully see in my face, it makes me happy. And every time I even FaceTime or WhatsApp or Skype, you know, Nima, or it could be any hundreds Sherpa.
Awesome.
But when I get off the phone, you know what I always feel? Freaking better about myself. I feel good. They have a way of making you feel good. And I tell you, if I can pass that energy on once a day somewhere in my life, then, you know, that's okay. And that's something, John, you would attest to. The Sherpa have a wonderful way of, even if you're going slow, you're about to get sick, or you're having a bad day, they can just make you feel that it's okay to have a bad day too sometimes.
Yeah. Hey, Jan, can you, I think I figured this out. Can you see the share I did? There. So this is a picture of the avalanche. So you can get a perspective. There's a couple of my fellow trekkers, and where if you sort of make a path from the people across that avalanche, we've got to get across that thing somehow, because the trail is no longer there. So I mean, this is just, again, back to your point. You just don't realize the size. And like I said, it was the only time, I mean, we entrusted Lapsang our lives, right? We the whole trip, my wife thought we were out of our minds, right? And she's like, you got to be out of your gourd. You're 55 years old. You're going to the ball. You're going to go for 2 weeks. I'd never taken a 2-week vacation in my life, right? I mean, it was like, and you're on the other side of the world. There's actually well better communications than I anticipated, but this was an example of us. So I hopefully we can go a little longer, because I got a couple more things I want to talk about. And you started alluding on it, and you sort of they make you feel good. And so talk about making you feel good. I want to make sure we talk about your 501c3, your not-for-profit, Make Others Greater. My experience, and we talked a little bit about it, but right, we sort of alluded to the difference between Sherpas and porters and others. I mean, when I was there, our Sherpas were our guides, but our porters were the guys that carried all our gear. And I think we paid those guys $5 a day plus 3 meals. And they were lining down the street in Ponkara to join us. So, I mean, this was a good gig for them. And so what my point is that a small amount of money goes an enormous amount a long way to do good in Nepal in particular. And so you started this Make Others Greater charity. And I want to give a shout out. And Jan, I'm hoping we can put a link in the show notes so that if anybody wants to donate, they have an opportunity. But Garry, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because it's phenomenal from my research.
Yeah, I mean, like, what you said, John, we're a very small nonprofit, probably I think last year, 99.8% or 99%, let's say, of every dollar we received went direct to source, right? The other 2 or 3% is what, not even hosting fees. Me and my wife take care of that kind of costs, separately and privately, but you obviously have some bank fees, et cetera, when you start wiring money or moving money from place to place. But we deal in 20s, hundreds, and on occasion, thousands. But we just sent a shipment to the village in Nepal. Just actually, it should be arriving here the next few days. That for $600, I'm buying thousands of Band-Aids. Hundreds of compression straps. 4 or 5 sets of crutches. 4 or 5 medical kits to place in certain areas around the villages. So if something was to happen, they could at least administer some basic first aid before getting them to a health post. And that's kind of what we try to do. Nima now in his village, and I was just in his village a year and a half ago. At one point he was the poorest, dirtiest Sherpa boy there. And now he has built a school, and we supply that school with supplies and books. And he's basically sort of the mayor of that village, with a huge focus on education and health and safety. And I kind of just said, hey, let's take this to another level, Nima, and maybe see if we can kind of expedite and improve to maybe some other surrounding villages. And that's kind of how the whole idea started. We had always privately supported, my very dear friends and my family, a number of children. But, like I said, a little bit of money goes a super long way. And pretty much every last penny we source in country. I can buy probably 100 times more pencils in Kathmandu for the cost, here in the U.S. And that's before you even start shipping things. So, but it's really, really good. It's small. We're happy. We're changing. Our focus is health, safety, and, education, primarily for the younger folks out there in the world. And, it could make me feel better. And the people that get behind me and that know that somebody's going to have a better day because of it, in a very remote area.
It's awesome. The bottom line is $25, $50, $100. You might as well put a couple of zeros on it here in the United States. It's just incredible how much $25 will do in Nepal, as you said. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that, because it is, to me, it's part of what I do. And the reason the whole Disruptor mantra is sort of to help give back to the community after a long, tenuous, illustrious, I guess, career here. So anyway, we're at the top of the hour, Jan. I've got a couple more things we can talk about, but if we have time, or it's up to you guys. This has been.
I have a connection for my active listening observations that I'd like to make as kind of our end point, John. I think that it'll really bring everything together.
We'll wrap that up, and then we'll have a little. We'll do the other pieces of this. But
that works for me.
The other thing, just so I want to give it before you do that, just I knew I'd take an hour talking about Nepal, because I could talk for days about it and climbing. But you've also done, as I mentioned earlier, you've done some other really cool stuff, which we maybe have another session on or have a sidebar on. But you've done these grueling marathons, and you've done you're an Ironman triathlete, and so You've obviously shown the world that you can, basically do anything when you put your mind to it. And so, Jan, that's sort of, we didn't get to some of those, but it's all part of your storied story, if you will. So back to you, Jan.
So from the very beginning of the episode, right? I'm just a student of the art of the story, right? And the storyline, the archetype, how to paint yourself as the hero and a vision, really bringing that to life and how it affects people via that positive ripple. And so this entire time, it's been beautiful because the overarching concept is your dream is possible regardless of obstacle, right? So Garry went through these different stages of what he believed his dream was capable of. And then with each accomplishment, we'll say, or with each end of a goal, that dream was able to take a next step up, right? It was able to make it to the next camp, we'll say. And it started in an abyss. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that a lot of times your dream manifests itself in an abyss at some point in your life. And the dream is not the automatic rise to the summit, but the blessing of being able to visualize the journey from point A to point B. And so you start to run into these obstacles. Garry's, the first, people are saying that it's not possible to climb with one arm, or it's not possible to lead this group of people up there. It's impossible to do this. It's impossible to do that. But then you start walking and you just keep going, and it's an accumulation of, well, we accomplished that. The next thing is, screw it. Let's go to the next level. Let's go to the next level. The Sherpa comes in and you don't even necessarily believe it's possible, but then you get other people that start to believe in your momentum more than you do. And they're unlocking new pieces of yourself that you have permission to access now. And it's this giant group effort, to Garry's point, that starts to motivate each other. And then, John, to your point, you walk up on this path that you're banking on. You're like, okay, my dream is possible. I'm going to head this direction. I know exactly where I need to go. And then you get there and a freaking avalanche covered it up. And you're like, shit. Well, now I don't know if I can make it across. But what I love when you guys started talking about the Sherpa mentality, it's what really punched me in the face, is that this overarching episode is just, you look at that avalanche and the majority of people would say, I need a helicopter to come pull me out, or I quit. I was relying on that path to be there. My dream is now impossible. But the Sherpa is like, all right, time to get serious and skittle our way across, because that's just how you need to get it done. So regardless of whether the path that you thought was there actually exists, or if it's completely destroyed, there's still a pathway to accomplishing what you set out to accomplish, if you choose to see it as an opportunity. And this entire episode is just absolutely phenomenal, because when it comes to allowing people to have the permission to seek greatness in themselves, that is what this all really comes down to for me. So I'm just absolutely mind blown. This is a beautiful episode. This is going to impact a lot of people.
I knew this would be fun. Actually, one sort of point to jump on top of that comment, especially for us, for your apex chasers, right? So chasing the apex makes it sound like you're trying to get to the summit. What I always tell people, in this avalanche story is sort of a good example of that. We had already been to our summit, Montepeturi Base Camp, and then ultimately to Annapurna Base Camp. But once you get to the top, and I'm sorry, Garry, we didn't get to talk about your Hillary Step story, unless you want to go into it. But you get to the summit, you're essentially halfway done. You got to figure out how to come back down. And a whole lot of people don't make it down, right? They make it up, and then something happens. I sometimes say it's harder to get down than it is to get up. So when you're chasing that apex, or you're trying to get that summit, don't forget, you still got to come back down so you can summit the next time.
So that you can give back. It's that little bit up, little bit down. It's never really a true up. I love that. I absolutely love that idea, right? Just a little up, little down. And that's people say falling in love with the process. They say a whole bunch of different ways to try to explain what that feels like. But it's generally, what I've really realized is the whole reason why I push myself so hard to go out and seek achievement, or to push people or do motivational speaking, is not because I want any of it for myself, right? It's because if I go out and I accomplish this, I'm kind of validating myself and giving myself permission to pursue the next goal. But then there's a ton of other people that are watching what we do and say, okay, now I have permission to seek this next goal, because this has been accomplished. And it's that I think is a big internal motivator for me, is not to chase success so much for personal gain, but to showcase what's possible to people. And that's what I love about this entire episode. So
Anyway, so
Right on.
Gary, any parting thoughts or stories? Or, I mean, I again, we'll have a little parting ceremony here in a second, but
Right. No, I think a lot of things have been said very, very nicely. I mean, that was a nice wrap up from you, Jan, for sure. You know, and it's funny how we're on very similar pages, and you use the phrase "the permission to dream," you know, and I tend to use the phrase sometimes we have to give ourselves the permission also to dream and also to succeed, right? And you know, and on that note, you know, I just want to say it's been a real privilege, and thanks for inviting me and starting off my week on this very high note. And hopefully, you know, God willing, it's going to be a good week. And yeah, I don't know if we're going to share that last little video just to remind us what is possible, you know, together.
We'll do that. But before we do that, if we were in person, I would have the opportunity to present you with a ceremonial scarf, which is very customary in Nepal when you are leaving. And it's a symbol of thank you and good luck and safety and stuff. So I took the liberty and I sent both of you a scarf. So here's my scarf. So we're going to have a virtual sort of scarf. So what I'm going to do, Gary, is I'm going to pretend to virtually hand you this scarf, and you can put it on and we'll wrap this show up. So here you go, pal.
Thank you.
So you probably give us a little more background on these scarves, but this is actually the one I got in Nepal, and the ones that you have are ones that I bought and I give out to my friends. But it's sort of a way you, like I said, when you start to leave and you get on the airplane or you leave the base camp or whatever, a lot of times you're presented with these ceremonial scarves. So I just wanted to say namaste.
Yes.
And Tashi Delka or Depka. They say that right?
Almost. Tashi Dele. Yes. But you know, I think I was talking to you about this, John, the other day, you know, but you know, sometimes it doesn't matter if it's pronounced correctly or incorrectly, but if you even try to say it and you mean it from your heart, then people hear it from their heart. And you know, on that note, thank you for the kata. And it will be put in a very, very special place in my house, that I can assure you. So,
all right. So, Jan, let's wrap up we got another short video to wrap this whole thing up and give you a little extra shot of enthusiasm to go tackle your week. And we got a new month, and hopefully, again, thank you very much, Gary.
a lot of new good content to come out. So we'll show this video, and then I don't know. We're just going to leave it at that. This episode has taken care of itself. Pay attention to the next time we put some stuff out. If you're not subscribed already, if you're watching this on YouTube, click the little bell for the notifications. Click subscribe so that you can see other things. Look for the show notes. That'll be posted later today, along with Gary's podcast episode on the Apex podcast about a week from now. All of the resources to the foundation, the other video clips, and YouTube links will be contained in those show notes. So make sure you pay attention to those if you want to learn more about Gary. And so let's go ahead and send ourselves out.